Coming at you from the ATL, from inside the paint and beyond the arc. This is Nothing But Nest, your Atlanta Hawks podcast. Now, here are your hosts, DeShaun Tate and Caleb Johnson.
Welcome into Nothing But Nest, episode 27, an Atlanta Hawks podcast here on the Odyssey Network, as we're now on YouTube as well. Caleb Johnson in with my co-host, DeShaun Tate. DeShaun, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Listen, I've had the luxury and opportunity to kind of do some of this stuff from distance a little bit. Yep. Down here in Tampa, I'm always on the road, living out of a suitcase some way, somehow. And no, man, but it's good, man. I wouldn't miss this for the world, that's for sure, man. I'm ready to talk about these Hawks, dude.
I was just about to say, I wish my job let me travel. I just end up at home with the TV on watching these Atlanta Hawks who
careful what you wish for.
I know.
Be very careful.
Yeah, I know. But honestly, when it comes to this Hawks team, it feels like, quite honestly, as we record this 27th episode that we've been talking about this team for a while now, this is one of our episodes where I don't know that I have a lot of positive things to say, and I don't know that I have a lot of energetic things to say, because this most recent loss to the Pelicans, 116-107, was one of the more meh things that I feel like I've witnessed in a while. And it's honestly, it's disappointing. It's after a stretch of games for this Hawks team who went out on the West Coast and needed to pick up some wins, and they weren't necessarily going to come very easily. There was going to be a lot of reasons that this wasn't going to be a very positive road trip for them. But they because they start off kind of on the wrong foot against Portland, but then they get it going against Phoenix. And we were here last Thursday talking about how dominant that was and just how, things were really going in a good direction. They follow that up with a really impressive win against Utah that started a back-to-back. And, so you're like, okay, so Trae Young, doesn't get invited to the All-Star game, and yet he plays within himself. He's playing selfless basketball, and it's like, okay, so maybe they can start to make a run. And then you follow that up with where we have been the last two games over the weekend, of course, in Denver. Look, a back-to-back, DeShaun, of going Utah to Denver at above elevation, or above sea level, whatever, at elevation, maybe how they phrase it, I don't know. But it's really high up there. It's really more difficult to breathe. And then you throw on the fact of against Denver, no Trae Young, because, DeShaun, we've got another non-COVID illness.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you are one who,
of course, we do.
I'm just simply.
I don't know. I mean, you're the only one that mentioned something about
we got to talk.
Say? No, I'm saying what did you say? You said something along the lines of Trae Young playing selfless basketball. It almost sounds like a fairy tale at this point. And you know what? Listen, I mean, this is a team and I get it, from what we've seen from this team, I don't think there's no doubt. You've heard me say this many a times. I'll say it just one more time. The only thing that has been consistent about this team is that they've been consistently inconsistent.
Yep.
And I get it. Some people are gonna say, as has been, Trae Young's participation in games. Why don't I just say it, since everyone's thinking it anyway? But I think that instead of looking at it from a pessimistic standpoint, I want to look at it from an optimistic
get out of the way.
No, I get it, but there has been some optimism. Okay. I really do believe that while things have not been ideal for the Hawks, and probably not anywhere near ideal based on the expectation we had. I think that's what makes their season look so much worse than it's been. They are, 500 or above 500 or somewhere right around that range in terms of
27 and 28 trip now.
So when it comes to the road trip.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
They have they have a pretty good record.
They went 2-3 on the road.
But I mean, I'm talking about overall so far in the first half of the season. I think they've done pretty good in the first half of the season in terms of
we're 75% through the season now, DeShaun.
Right. So I'm saying, okay, fine, over half. But yet still the road games have been pretty much good. Now, some people might say that's the only thing that I felt pretty good about. But I do think that the acquisition of DeShaun Tate, Debo Murray, since then, the expectations became much higher, and deservedly so. But because they are not where most people anticipated them being at this point, that makes it look worse than what it really is. Because of the blow up and dust up or whatever, what have you, between, Trey and Nate, which still lingers. And I think that's a bigger deal than even acquiring DeJounte Murray anyway. At this point, that looks like it's the elephant in the room. That makes everything feel much worse than it is. Being in the position that they are in terms of seeding in the East, makes things feel worse than they actually are. But I don't think I don't think the sky is falling. I don't think that it's time to push the panic button. I don't think that it's time to start shipping people off and trading people just because and all these different things. There you go, 14 and 17. I don't think 14 wins on the road is pretty freaking good, especially for a team who to everyone has looked pretty freaking bad. I think that it's time to start looking at things. Maybe it's the sunshine that I've been able to get over the course of the last 24 hours. But I really don't feel like the end is near. And I'll tell you what else, Caleb. Got a really good feeling that this team is going to look maybe not completely different, but very much different when we return back from the All-Star break.
Very optimistic. And I'm glad you feel that way, honestly, because I do think Hawks fans in a certain light need that. As I was talking about earlier, like going up and having Trey unable to play against Denver, the fact that they were never really in that game, down 20 points at the half and end up losing by 20 points, 128-108. Jamal Murray, torches them for 41. And then you got to the end of that game and you heard Nate McMillan, essentially kind of talk about like heavy legs. Yeah, we got heavy legs back to back. We're at this high elevation, yada, yada, all of these sorts of things. And then you come into New Orleans and I mean, hey, I felt like there were a lot of positive things you could have taken away. They didn't give up on the game entirely. They did fight, even though turnovers did become a problem and all these various things. Look, I look at it this way. You talk about, the sky is not falling. You're right. The sky is not falling. Here's the problem with this Atlanta Hawks team. And this is something that Brad Rowland actually tweeted about. I believe it was the end of last week. This team is just average. They're just absolutely average. I think at that point, it was actually quite comical how their record and everything else kind of all reflected that. But this team being the 8th seed in the East, being 14 and 17 on the road, 13 and 11 at home, just average, not too exciting. Like that. That's when you have a performance from Trae Young, your star, who is supposed to be chip. He's talking about chip on the shoulder. We talked about chip on the shoulder. He goes on a podcast and says, "I've always got the chip on the shoulder. It never goes away. It's always here." And then he goes 4-14 for 16 points, 2 of 8 from 3. He's got 16 assists. And and we look at that and we go, all right. So there was a lot of ball movement in the game, right? Not really, but okay. It's just DeAndre Hunter going 0 of 9 from the field, going 0 of 5 from 3 point, has 3 points for the game. All right, yeah, other guys stepped up. Yeah, there were some positive things to take away, but just horribly average and honestly horribly boring. That's my biggest fear for this team in this last third of the season is just being horribly boring, where it's like, okay, we get a little excitement here, get a little excitement there, um, but you bore the fans, you bore the team itself. Like, do they care? Are they that interested anymore? I heard Nate McMillan talking after the Pelicans loss, where someone asked him if it was like, oh, is this the result of a long road trip? And I felt like for a guy who would normally be like, we can't use that as an excuse, like that's never okay. We had 2 days off. He was like, yeah, maybe it was the fact that it's long road trip and we're coming to the end of it and guys are looking at getting to go home. And I'm like, man, I mean, if that's not the sound of a guy who, and I'm not putting everything on him, I'm not putting everything on Trae Young. I'm going to say as a collective whole, they're
Yeah,
just giving me big time, we're just going to ride
whatever.
this.
If we do, we do. If we don't, we don't. Listen,
Hmm.
Caleb, I told you, what were we talking about, 4 games ago? We're talking about what? A 4 game West Coast road trip, is that correct?
It was 5 games. Yeah.
5. Okay. I don't know where I got 4 from.
All good.
But I feel like I remember saying give me at least 500.
Hmm.
Um
Well,
Obviously you can't
I
do that
think
with
too.
5 games.
You were looking at between now and the All-Star break, which is what, 8 games, I believe, 9 games.
It was 8 games out.
Yeah,
So give me 500.
yeah.
But I feel like
And over the last 4, they've done that. They beat Phoenix and
no,
Utah
that's
for
what I was
2.
gonna say. That's exactly what I was gonna say. It
Sorry.
was just before the Phoenix game. No, thank you.
Yeah.
But you know what it was? It was a tease. When we saw the Phoenix game, and we agreed that that's the best that we've ever seen them look.
Hmm.
Probably all season, collectively as a unit. Maybe didn't wow you, but gave you the balance and working well amongst one another in terms of showing, displaying the chemistry that they have and playing well on both sides of the ball and all these other type of things. And then they turn around, they win, the next game on the road, right before they, run up on Denver, and then New Orleans, obviously. But it's just been a tease. They gave you a feeling like, can they win all 4 of these games? You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And then even more so on top of that is, what did we say going into this whole thing? It wouldn't surprise me if they walked away with the only win being a win in Mile High against Denver,
Sure.
some way, somehow. You know what I mean? But those are the things. You don't know what you can expect, but you do know that you can expect one thing, and you can expect inconsistency. And that's not a good brand. That's not a good reputation that you have for yourself right now. And I think that we all understand that. We all know that things have to change, but I do think that you have time for some of this change. You talk about the chip on the shoulder thing. Yeah, I think he's got the chip on the shoulder. It's not really going to matter what he shoots from a percentage standpoint. I know we had some conversations about what 11 is shooting in terms of percentages, or was that me and producer Rick texting back and forth about it? He's always going to shoot poorly from a percentage standpoint. He's always going to have those Allen Iverson numbers, but you're always going to know that if you don't have the shots, that you're not going to be in position to win basketball games. You will also be in position to lose basketball, and that's just the reality of what it is that we're looking at. I'm a believer. It's been so many of the guys on this team. Whether it's being hurt or we've seen Clint sitting and he's showing some you've grown some frustrations a little bit with some things from Clint, particularly at the beginning of the year, and DeAndre on and off of the, on the IR and so forth, and maybe not always being consistent. We said the game ball, or at least I know for sure my game ball going into All-Star weekend, and I don't feel like that's going to change over the course of the next X amount of games, is a rookie, one of the youngest players in the NBA, AJ Silent Killer Griffin. That looks bad to a degree on a team who has the expectations as high as they do this year. But I get this feeling, Kev. I really do. I get this feeling that good things are to come for this team after the All-Star break. History has shown it. I just, there's something telling me that they're going to get clicking. I'm not going to tell you they're going to, creep their way back into the, top half of the East or this and that, but I think they have a realistic chance to where they are now 8th to put themselves in position to be somewhere right around that 5, 6, somewhere in that range.
I think there's one thing I'm going to hold on to that I'll bring up later when we talk about the schedule coming up that I think is going to be their saving grace, and why you making that point right there, I'll back it on a certain condition that the Hawks have coming up that we'll get into in a little bit. But it's honestly, it's the only thing that they've got going for them is that, hey, maybe after the All-Star break, they can really right the ship. They can really turn this thing around. The one thing that we can get into right now is simply the fact of, all right, you want to talk about trade deadline stuff. Kyrie Irving, no longer with the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah.
Having that deal, having that all go down where Kyrie goes to Dallas, and now maybe Brooklyn continues on into sell mode. Maybe they move on from Kevin Durant before the deadline, or maybe that team is just not as motivated, just simply from the fact of losing that piece. I don't know. I think everyone's kind of expecting them to make a collapse, and then you've got Cam Thomas, who's gone now 3 straight games, 40 plus points in all 3 of
yeah.
Okay. I think the team that you're waiting for is is a Miami gonna have some sort of collapse? Is a Philly gonna have some type of issue? Those are the things it feels like you're really holding out for. But then, of course, DeShaun, it's all feels like it's predicated on the next 48. That's about 48 hours, right, from now. The trade deadline when it comes to a close.
Sure, somewhere in that range.
So let's, for the last time, thankfully, at least in my case, let's talk about this trade deadline.
Okay.
And what you're at least expecting from it, because it feels like, DeShaun, that we've been talking about the trade deadline since the 3rd week of the NBA season. I think that was when the first time that the John Collins stuff came back up again, it was like,
did it ever go anywhere, Caleb? Did it ever?
It went away.
Pipe down?
It did, because if you remember right, John started off the season, the first 2 games of the year, really hot, and it was like, this is the John that everybody, that they were smart to hold on to. And then, of course, I think it was 2 weeks after that the first rumors came up of, well, we think John might be getting shopped, to so-and-so. And we've gone over it. Of course, so many different things has happened. You mentioned it earlier, you've got the Trey issues with Nate. You've got Nate supposedly being, almost walking away from the team and being convinced to stay. You've had all these different things. You've had injuries, you've had Bogey missing a chunk of the season. You've had Clint going down for a long stretch. DeAndre Hunter going down for a pretty extensive stretch. John Collins getting hurt there for a bit. So all of these different things have led us to it feels like ad nauseum talk about February 9th, Thursday, the trade deadline, when the Hawks play the Phoenix Suns. Once we get to that game, it's all over with, and whoever's on this team pretty much is going to be on this team. So I will ask you, DeShaun, in your expert opinion, what happens with the Atlanta Hawks at the trade deadline?
Using the term expert very loosely. I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. You ready?
Sure.
You have to listen very, very, very closely.
Uh-oh, you're treating you sound like you're about to be like Landry Fields.
This is exactly what I believe is going to happen. Just listen.
All right. I don't hear anything.
That's my point.
Yep.
Nothing is going to happen.
Yep.
I'm not a believer. How long have we been saying this? Listen, I came onto, the airwaves over the, was it back in June, the draft? I mean, at that point, I felt like, all right, we're so past due on seeing John being moved or whatever. And again, past due at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Like I just, yep. I'm like we talked about, the main thing is just not feeling like you're giving someone away and not getting anything back. Mm-hmm. This is not a guy that's been, in trouble. Yes, you've had some inconsistencies, but I think that he's not the only player you've seen that from on this team. He's not the only player that you can say that about in this league. Amongst so many other things, he's not a guy that respectfully, but he's not someone that, you're trying to, in the middle of a tug of war with, trying to get him to take the, pull on his heartstrings just to get him to take a COVID test and all this other kind. He's not that guy. Like he may not be the most consistent guy in the world, but he's also giving you some things that some other guys are just not giving you, especially lately. Now, that is the weird and little bit of awkward part about some of this, is just like things starting to come around full circle and look like it's working out for the team in the, moments of just before the clock strikes midnight all of a sudden. And then what happens after there's the deadline? Do we go back into this inconsistency period all over again? The best thing that John has done is completely closed his ears out, because I think that, there's what he was, at least the energy, the vibe that I got was that what was going on with him and hearing all these different rumors that he's now over, it was dealing with how he can handle it in between the ears. You ever heard of the term or the expression, Caleb, going in one ear and out the other?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it because I do it quite often.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Well, listen, I think that John has gotten to a point where he doesn't even let it go through the first ear to give it a chance to even come out on the other side, if that makes sense. And that has been for the betterment of this team. That's been for the betterment of his game. And he's really just kind of dialed in and tried to focus on that particular piece. In some ways, I think he's been, probably the most consistent player on this team in that time span. And that's probably, that's including DJ Murray. Now, some people are going to look at the 40-point games and the this and the that, but sometimes because of how, poor Trey has shot in the ball and this and that and some of the other stuff going on with the team, and the three-point shooting is terrible amongst all these other things, it's kind of overshadowed how good John Collins has been. And that's just John Collins. Unfortunately, it's kind of starting to look like, well, maybe Bogey Bogdanovic is the guy that's on the clock here.
So the thing that really I've been harping on for a while is I've thought if somebody's going to get moved on, the guy that you just mentioned, Bogey Bogdanovic, being the most likely, because of that player option, because he's essentially a guy that you could trade for, and he's a rental. He's a shooting rental. The teams who are competing for a championship, who are trying to be in that contention, do this all the time. However, the Hawks have been rather clear that they're not just going to give up guys for nothing. And that makes me wonder if they have really high values on a guy like Bogey Bogdanovic, who I don't think people realize, DeShaun, how much of a leader Bogey is in that locker room. There was something that was written by Hawks.com very recently about just Bogey's his drive and his the Hawks have this shot chart or this counter up in the where they practice, and they kind of keep tally of like how many shots they've hit or something like that. There's some way that they're keeping tally of all those things. And I know that like Trey is usually up there, and DeShaun Tate is usually up there, and I believe AJ is too. But Bogey is number one and almost always stays number one, because as soon as he sees his name drop, he's back in there putting up shots, wanting to be back at the top. And I say all that to say, like, he is extremely driven, and he is a big motivator for this team,
Sure.
especially when they're going through these rough stretches where things aren't working for them. He's not a coddler. Like, he's not he's more of a do your job. We need more from you kind of guy. And I think that Landry Fields and Kyle Korver, the two guys who are going to be making a lot of these decisions within the next few hours, they have to value that. And I have to imagine that Kyle Korver is looking at a guy like Bogey thinking he needs to stay. This team needs shooters, and it doesn't matter how much of a rental he could be to somebody else and how much he could save us some money by getting that $18 million off the books for next season.
That's correct.
We need that guy. The guy that I do think they could give up on, because it sure seems like we've seen some really positive things out of him, and yet we've been frustrated with him time and time again. It's just kind of an up and down thing constantly with them. And then there's also he's just not getting a lot of playing time. And I don't know. I just feel like I would expect to have seen more at this point. And yet, so I'm thinking of this in also of terms of DeShaun, like, we have to go what other teams are going to value from the Hawks. Because I did see something out there, and I won't name names or anything like that, but I've seen people talk about the fact that the Hawks need to trade the Holiday brothers, that the Hawks need to trade Frank Kaminsky. And what I would say to those people is, if you don't want them on your team, why do you think somebody else
will
wants them on theirs? So the person that I think is most likely to get traded is Jalen Johnson. I think he's a guy who has a lot of upside, who has some development to make, and maybe the Hawks aren't really interested in making that development with him specifically. And he's a piece that they can move on from. If they decide not to do that, then that makes me think maybe he's the guy that they are waiting for to play that 4 when in the offseason they move on from a guy like John Collins, because I just don't see John getting moved at this deadline. I've literally seen text messages that were screenshot and sent to me of conversations with a couple of general managers in the league who laughed at the idea of trading for for John Collins. They're just not interested in doing it. And that's why, I mean, you can start going down the list, obviously, of like, is DeAndre Hunter, is Onyeka Okongwu, is Clint
Yeah.
Capella, you can do all of that stuff. It just feels like, what are the most obvious? The Bogey Bogdanovich and Jalen Johnson. And then other than that, you said this to start off this topic, which was, what do you think happens? Man, the people that I've talked to in the last few days have been just like you were to start this, dead silent, like on this. I'm hearing a lot of movement, and yet it's gotten real quiet on the Hawks end. And why is that the case? Because from my understanding, the Hawks' value on some of these pieces is rather high. And there's some other teams that are, swimming like sharks in the water, thinking that they were going to take advantage of the Hawks at the deadline. And it may mean that the Hawks don't improve, that they just end up being who they are. And yet we'll have to wait another end of the season into the off season to see what changes could end up being made. Sorry, I know I just went on for a really long time there.
No, you're good. I mean, I think it's good that we see some loyalty, see some commitment and still being willing to, express to John, because one of the things you got to remember is that there were, of all the guys when John was there, I'm not sure anybody is still on this team anymore from when John came in as a rookie.
No, just him.
Yeah, exactly. And so with him going through all of the ups and downs of the before Trey, like people just remember from what you've seen lately. People remember this year. People remember last year. People remember the Eastern Conference Finals and some of these different things. And, the baby Hawks climbing and looking like they could be something if they just get one or two more pieces. Or prior to Bogdanovich and prior to Gallinari and prior to Rajon Rondo and prior to Lou Williams and prior to. But what most people appear, how fast we forget and don't remember as to what this looked like before they got Trae Young and what put them in position to even have a top 3 or top 5 pick in the NBA draft to begin with. You had to be that bad. And John was around for that, and John was a good sport for that, and John was consistent for that, and John made everybody feel good. John made people feel like the way that they feel about bringing DeJounte Murray in here. If I'm just being honest, like that's the way that he made people feel. Fringe all-star, and of course had to settle for slam dunk contest or something like that year. But nonetheless,
we like to forget that.
No, that's fine. But listen, for somebody who's had that consideration that year to potentially have been an all-star, I think that speaks volume, and it is so fast that we do tend to forget. I like I said, I don't think that we'll see the movement the way that other people think that we might or that we should or that we could or whatever the case may be. And I don't think that you want to rush into. I think you'll entertain calls. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what you better do. Have you seen this roster? By the way, there's not enough room in this town for 2 Johnsons. But have you seen this roster? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it looks atrocious.
Well,
if something has to be improved, that's what needs to be improved. And if I'm moving pieces around to try to get rid of someone to bring somebody else in, I want someone. People might say, well, what positioner, what this or what that? Give me the kind of guy. Forget about somebody that can score and this and that. First things first, I want to address the leadership and the toughness, the voice of the locker room. All of these different, that's the guy. And I think that you got some of that with having DeJounte. But I do believe that if you go and get that piece, that is something that could help assist the front office in when they do eventually move forward in selecting their coach. If in the event, what we feel like is going to happen at the end of the season is going to happen. Not saying we're wishing for it. Not saying we're hoping for it. I never ask for nobody. I hope nobody loses their jobs and, get the U-Haul truck out front and send them a whole bunch of cardboard boxes and whatever else. But in the event, I think that it's always going to be a smart or wise idea to have some veteran leadership and part of that package deal. Not saying it's got to be for that player, but as a part of that player, if they decide to make a move and make a deal, because everybody can use a winner on some level, and we know that that's something that the Atlanta Hawks lack and that they need on this roster somewhere.
I think the biggest issue with that, really hard to find that just in general in the NBA, and then at the trade
That's why they
deadline.
get paid the big money, Caleb. That's why they
Yeah.
get paid the big money. You go find those guys.
Yeah, but I think at the trade deadline too, the biggest issue is you're running into a little bit of desperation. And the Hawks and Landry Fields, look, he came on 92.9 the game, said that he would be dumb not to answer phone calls, but that he's essentially not desperate. And then I want us to hear from one specific thing that Landry Fields had to say that kind of helps with what we've already been talking about when it comes to the fact of, the Hawks staying pat and being comfortable with what they have.
What we are seeing is some good fruit so far of what we've been doing, and the increased communication and making sure we have clear expectations for guys, and them responding in the way in which they're doing is positive.
So that's Landry Fields talking about, we've seen positive strides from our team. We're seeing our own guys develop. Why did they hire a guy like Kyle Korver? Because he is someone who can help with the development of these players. Landry's talking about setting expectations. Do you think there weren't expectations under Travis Schlenk? There were, but
there was.
There's new expectations under Landry Fields and Kyle Korver. And it seems like maybe this team is more comfortable with those expectations, or they're coming to terms with those expectations and going like, hey, maybe we're a little more realistic at February, 7th and February 8th and at the trade deadline. Maybe we're more realistic with our expectations than we were at game 1 when we brought in DeShaun Tate and thought that was just going to fix everything. That's what it really feels like, DeShaun, is this being a team that is developing, is growing. I do feel like there have been, if none other than you point to the silent killer earlier, AJ Griffin. That's a sign of development. And so maybe they just sit tight and look at their development and go, maybe we can develop this on into the next season too, because we'll be fine just wherever this thing happens to land. I do want to move on to a little bit of the next few games coming up for the Hawks.
Okay.
As we're looking at a stretch where finally this team is coming home. The next 2 games, you start off, you get Phoenix after the trade deadline. So maybe you'll have your whole team by then, or maybe some things will be getting worked out. Who knows? But we'll at least know who's playing for this team by the time the Hawks play the Phoenix Suns on Thursday. Then you get a bit of a reunion as DeJounte Murray will play the San Antonio Spurs, his former team, for the first time at home against San Antonio. So I feel like just a good opportunity after this long. They were gone for like 8 days, I believe it was.
Yeah.
The Hawks were. So after doing all of this on the road and back and forth business that they've been doing, because I think even, there was only the Clippers game that one Saturday, a couple Saturdays ago, that even broke up this road trip. But now they're home. Would you like to know, DeShaun, over the final 27 games that we have, how many of those 27 games are at home?
I got a feeling of the 27, it's probably going to be somewhere around, I would imagine that answer is definitely 15 plus. I'm going to go with, of the 27, I'm going to go with.
You can cheat and look at the lower third.
No. Oh, well, thanks. 17 of the next 27. I think, listen, thanks, Rick. That is something that's going to play a huge part. As I also told you, that, I think Trey not making the All-Star game is something that's going to help push them forward. I think just being able to be at home, also to catch up on some rest amongst some other things, is going to bode well for this team after the All-Star break. Being at home has always and forever been a big piece for this team. I mean, even dating back to last year, coming into this year, their main mantra or what they've kind of hung their hats on has been defend home court. And I think that they're going to do that and not just do it. I think that they're going to do it well. And I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing it, not only because I get to come hang out with Caleb Johnson and a little bit more, and we get to, eat some popcorn and share some laughs and whatever else. But this is a team that I just anticipate looking different. It is just that simple. You'll see.
Well, DeShaun, I can make this personal to you. Are you sleeping better in hotel bed, or are you sleeping better in at home bed? That might be a trick question.
Always and forever will be hotel bed.
I obviously I joke with you because you'll be,
I know
away
that.
from the little one for a little bit.
Well, obviously that's why I joke with you.
Sure.
Obviously,
but
it's always gonna be home bed, man.
Sure, and so that's the thing. That's what I'm leaning into for these guys is they've been on the road like crazy. They've been in Denver and Utah and all these different places. And to finally get to come home for a consistent bit, and only have, a couple, only have 10 of those games, be away from home, and kind of sprinkled in. So you get some longer stretches where you get to stay at home for a bit. Honestly, that's the thing that I've got to put my faith in for this team. Is not only that maybe they surprise us and they do something exciting at the deadline and they bring in a piece who's going to make this team better, but that them being at home and get some consistency, as you've mentioned, because this team is the epitome of being inconsistent, that maybe that can help a bit. And if anything, honestly, if it just doesn't hurt them, if they can go 500 or so, if they can stay around that 8 seed, just don't drop out of the tournament. That's just don't drop out of the play-in, and maybe surprise everybody, get in, and get out of the play-in, and get up into that 6 seed. And then we're feeling pretty confident about this team and just kind of taking it for what it is, because I feel like that's what I'm doing for the rest of the season with this team. Is just taking for what it is, and enjoying the moments, and hoping that there are still some fun things along the way, because it feels like it's been too much negativity, too much mundane sometimes, that I hope we've got another Phoenix game in this team, honestly, and do it at home too,